panelists gave me some very impressive bios, and I was going to read them, but since I'm running this, I've decided not to. What I would like to do is have each panelist just say their name and give 2 or 3 sentences, and then we can bring Jason up and we can let the games begin. So, Mark, could you start, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
I'm from Volition. This is better.
Okay.
I'm Mark Gallagher. I'm from Volition Incorporated. I've been involved in the games industry for a little over 10 years. I started doing level design work and have programmed on a number of titles that Volition has done over the years, and I am now currently the technical director there, which basically means I'm a glorified manager.
Hi, I'm Jo Cloud, senior producer over at Xbox in the platform group, so I'm actually responsible for the console itself. I started out as a programmer nearly 8 years ago in the UK for a small games company, and then moved up through that into more of a managerial role and into production. And basically what a producer does is kind of hold it all together. Think of it as kind of the putty that sticks the whole team together and make sure that they're all kind of sailing in the same direction.
Chris Satchel, development manager at Microsoft Game Studios. Doing this for about 9 years. Sometimes it feels a hell of a lot longer than that, especially about 3 in the morning. I came to games from doing AI after university, and what I do now basically after lots of years of programming and managing other programmers is I work with Microsoft trying to make sure our games technically are great and that our partners can make great games as well. And my newest day job, is one thing you'll find from the panelists here, is we tend to end up with several, is making sure that our game studios are going to be successful on our next console.
Hey folks, my name is Martin Murphy. I'm a glorified artist / manager. My role at Midway is to help the games get along with the art the best they can. It's a really exciting field. I've been able to jump between all sorts of different forms of entertainment doing artwork. I love games the most. I think it's the most collaborative art form that's around, and the reason why we're here tonight is hopefully to connect with some of the future team members of our company. So I hope you guys gain benefit from being here tonight.
I'm Joel Sider. I'm the technical director at Midway Games. I've been in the industry for over 17 years. I got started doing Apple II and Commodore 64 stuff, then Super Nintendo, PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, arcade, PC, you name it. I've pretty much done it. I've been at Midway for a little over 5 years, and like I said, I'm technical director, which, like Mark, means I'm a glorified manager. So.
I guess that makes me the most glorified manager. So, my name is Matt Booty. I'm the Vice President of Product Development for Midway Games. I graduated from Purdue University in the late 80s with a degree in electrical engineering and a Master of Fine Arts degree. I showed up at Midway in the heyday of the coin-op arcade days. I got to have an office right next door to Ed Boon when he was working on the first Mortal Kombat game, all written in assembly language, and have been there since 1991. Currently, my job is to run the production side of the studio here in Chicago and help manage and coordinate the 5 game development teams that we have there.
And I'd like to thank our panelists for being patient while Jack and I told everybody about everything. And to get everybody involved first, what I'd like to ask is something that I thought of as Jack was talking, and just like to go down the line, starting with Mark. Does your family know you are in game development, and what do they think of it?
So I started typing in programs, much like, you get the little magazine, you type in these programs. So I think my parents thought I was crazy that I spent all this time doing it. And I said, someday I'm going to write these things. Oh, yeah, ha, ha, ha. So I went to the University of Illinois, and I met my future wife there, and we were walking one day. I said, you know what, I'm going to go write games. And she says, can you make any money doing that? So she was really concerned that there was no money in this business. But yes, they all actually do know, and my 6-year-old kid thinks it's about the coolest thing I could ever do.
Sure, my family knows that I'm in game development. This is my husband sat right next to me. My family back in the UK, however, took a slightly different tack on this. Graduating from university, I went into management consultancy, kind of for the same reasons we've touched on so far this evening. Gaming wasn't something that you were supposed to do. After about 6 months as a management consultant in London, I simply could not stand another financial system or a database without going crazy. So I took a job, and my parents thought that I was going nuts, and there was no way that I was ever going to stay in the profession. But here I am 8 years later and enjoying every minute.
My brothers know what I do. My mother thinks that I do something for Microsoft. It's probably about games, but she's not quite sure exactly what that is. It's one of those things where they come over and say to you, so you still work in games? And you're like, yes, I still work in games. So you don't have a real job yet then? And they say, no, I have 3 real jobs. They just roll in and want to pay me once. But I think the most credibility I've ever had is working for Microsoft, because now at least they've kind of heard of it and they know it has a stock symbol, so it's kind of valid now.
My family is aware of the fact that I'm in games, many hours at the late nights, wondering where I'm at. That's because of the game companies. My parents encouraged me to be involved with games. We had early influence. For any of those your folks who haven't had this conversation with your parents, there's money to be made making games.
Yeah, my family knows. Interestingly enough, when I got started, they thought I was crazy. Like everyone else has mentioned, they said, "Can you make any money in that?" And it wasn't even until, I'd say maybe 5 or 6 years ago, that they stopped asking me, so when are you going to get a real job? So yeah, and actually looking at the fact that you guys can even are going to be offered this fall this type of a course, I think is outstanding, because when I got started, there really was no formal way to get in the game industry. I mean, when I got started, it really was just a bunch of hobbyists who, you know, kind of exchanged ideas and stuff like that. So I think it's great that there is a sort of like a path that you guys can take to get into this industry.
Yeah, my family knows I'm in games. You know, it used to be about 10 years ago, you could go out to dinner with people and they'd be like, "What do you do?" And you're like, "Oh, I'm in games." And they're like, "Oh," and you know, you could really get an attention getter. These days, I actually think it's become more mainstream to the point where it's like, you know, what do you do? I trade stocks, so I work at Home Depot, I make games. I mean, it's, you know, there is a coolness to it, but it is, the upside to it is it has become a more mainstream career, and you know, it's not really sort of like you're the oddball out anymore if you're in games.
Great. Let's open it up to the floor for some questions.
I'm just wondering what new technologies you would see are coming out in next generation consoles for students to pursue, such as programmable hardware, voice engineers, stuff like that. What do you see as the next big thing in games?
Yeah, I would say actually all of that. I think probably the other thing that's really going to become very important is learning how to program, and even more importantly, how to debug heavily multi-threaded, multi-processor systems. With like PlayStation 2, we're kind of just hitting the tip of the iceberg with that, and with the next generation consoles, you're going to see more and more processors, and those processors are going to have multiple cores. You're going to have multiple threads running simultaneously, and so, you know, if anyone here has worked in that type of environment, even on Windows or something, you can imagine it's a recipe for race condition hell. So definitely learn how to master that beast.
I think I'd like to add some things to that. I think some of the other things you can look at the next generation consoles, and obviously, as I have to be careful what I say, as we have a member of the Xbox group here and want to have a job on Monday. So the things you want to look at, I think, for either of the consoles coming up is very much about resource management. It's about managing bandwidth. It's not necessarily about having the fastest algorithm that can run in one part of the hardware. It's how do you manage your resources around the hardware. I think when we did PS2 development, that really became critical, and I think it's going to kind of continue that way. And then one thing after that is to look at, you know, eventually we're probably going to finally have to stop competing on graphics because it would get too expensive to differentiate ourselves. So if you kind of want to look a little bit ahead, you something, well, physics is coming up now, and I think we're going to get to other areas, and not so much about the hardware technology, but looking at areas like AI. If you really want to make yourselves valuable in a few years' time, just look at where companies will have to compete.
Yeah, I would echo that in terms of the resource management. I would say that the number one sort of gap that we see in people coming out of school, like the sort of the thing they need to bridge from academic programming to real world programming, is resource management. And you write a program on the PC, you're in some lab, you say, give me 64 meg of RAM, and magically it just appears because the PC that you're working on has a gig of RAM, and you go out and you malloc 400 things and you're asking it to draw all this stuff. You just have this sort of mystical sense that there's all these resources out there, and then you get somebody who needs to program on the PlayStation 2 that has 32 meg of RAM total for everything, and suddenly you're like, well, I wrote this pathfinding thing, and it only needs 128 meg of RAM, and it's like, okay, well, it needs to work in 4. So the same thing is true of networking, of audio, of graphics. To just really be aware of that when you're writing things. It's going to be a resource management problem, not necessarily just a who can write the most clever code problem.
Sure, and I would also take it away a little bit from just the technical problem. As it was alluded to earlier, these things are not a single person in a bedroom developing them anymore. They're huge, huge teams, and they're only getting bigger. The technology problems are getting bigger, and the number of people on the teams is getting larger. And the only way that can work within a limited budget is if people have skills in teamwork, communication, and just general idea of, I have this task to do, it's going to take me this long. Just get into the habit yourself now, when you're even in academia, of setting yourself goals of how long things are going to take, and get used to your skill set, because that's one of the biggest helpers, but certainly for a producer to know they can go to an engineer and say, how long is that going to take you, and get an accurate answer.
Hi, I've been fighting it to teach you as a child to get into the gaming industry, and I know you can probably get at this all the time, but how do I get in? If I design a game and bring it to the studio, and is there any chance it can be made? How do I get into it?
Yeah, I just wanted to tack on something, because as you answer that question, think about those of you who make hiring decisions. Are you hiring people who have these new media degrees, these game development degrees, and if so, why, and if not, why not?
Right, well, I guess the first thing is to I heard actually two questions in there that you said, how do I get in, and then how do I get a game design? In terms of getting a job as a programmer, that's, we could go on for 15 minutes with that. I think that the number one thing, the first question when somebody shows up to interview and they say, oh, I live for games, I want to make games, I'm dying to make games, I say, okay, well, what games have you made? Because if you really, really want to write games, you'll write Tic-Tac-Toe, you'll write Asteroids, you'll figure out how to go back and write your own version of Frogger. You'll show up at our doorstep with games that you've written, however primitive. Somebody who figures out and actually writes a tic-tac-toe that you can play is better than somebody who hasn't done anything. So that's sort of the job as a programmer. But as far as game design ideas go, games, you used to be able to make them in a couple months. A game takes 2 years to make, and most of our games have budgets between $5 and $10 million. So the odds of us taking a game design from somebody who sort of walks in off the street with an idea, it is a complicated, multi-month process, a lot like greenlighting a script at a movie studio, to get a game idea from a concept that somebody has to making the game. And it's very rare that a game is just a raw, new IP, new intellectual property. Things are based off of sequels, franchises, movie licenses, and tie-ins. So I would say focus that energy of, I've got this idea, hang on to that dream and hang on to that energy, but get yourself into a company and work your way up, because it's just not going to happen that somebody's going to sort of walk in off the street with a game idea and that's going to get a $7 million budget to make that game.
So let me address kind of the issue about how do I get in, because as a programming hiring person, I get asked this question a lot. So the first thing that I would say to anybody, even aside from a passion in games, is be able to solve problems programmatically. It's my opinion programmers are a dime a dozen. I think they're everywhere, and I think a lot of people know how to program in C. I think very few know how to program well in the language, and I think very few know how to solve problems Just given an arbitrary problem like, convert Fahrenheit to Celsius and, tell me something interesting about that. I mean, most people can't think through a written problem and write an interesting program about it. And so one of the things we've done at Volition, we give a programmer test to everybody. And these scores are actually relatively low. And it is because people tend not to think their way through a written problem all the way through. They say, I can solve this. And they solve it quickly and they move on. They don't think about those little, kind of like details about the problem that's kind of what we're looking for. So number one, far and above, is be able to take the language and do something interesting with it and know a lot about it. And the other thing is do a game demo. I can't echo what Matt said enough. And it's almost a requirement anymore to do a game demo. And when I have an opening, I might see 50 to 100 resumes for that opening. And the only thing that will differentiate them outside of understanding their programming skill is, have they shown the initiative to go out and do something interesting, make a game? I mean, some people complain, well, I can't do art. Well, I don't care. I want to see if you can program. I mean, we have artists to do art for you. So take some initiative.
Right. I mean, to that end, so a real quick story. So we had a guy that right now is working on Mortal Kombat. He was right out of school. His first programming job, he landed on Mortal Kombat. When he interviewed, his resume was horrible. He had no demo. And I, flat out told this kid, I said, well, you have to come back with something impressive. So I told him, go off and write a physics demo. I want to see you take a wireframe box and be able to drop it on the ground and give it rotation, give it angular momentum, see it bounce around, see it flop on the ground. To Mark's point, it had no graphics. It didn't require any sort of graphical knowledge, but it was a problem-solving exercise. Well, I didn't hear anything back, but lo and behold, 3 months later, this kid came back, had written a Windows demo. You could start the box out, you could give it velocity, it would drop, it would bounce off other boxes. Clearly, he had gone off and learned a lot of stuff, and based on that, we hired him. So, it doesn't have to be a whiz-bang graphical thing. It needs to show that you can attack a problem and write a program to show that you know how to solve that.
So, I'm actually also going to the second part of the question about academic courses and things. I want to add one thing. The demo stuff is absolutely true. So, we're all going to tell you that because you see a lot of resumes, and what you want to see is somebody, and it's what we want, is seeing that passion. When I was like 9, I got Atari 800 and I used to program. I used to get up like 3 hours before school so I could program. And I'm 9 years old, and my parents haven't seen me for like 3 months now because I'm 9 and I'm in my bedroom programming. And that's one thing to look for, people who have had that passion. And exactly what Matt's saying is like, if you've got passion, you're going to come with a demo. If you just turn up like, hey, I've got cool academic qualifications and I want a job, there's going to be somebody that's got that. Got a good GPA, can program and has a demo, and is willing to spend the time to do it. Also, something personally, I've recruited a lot of people from universities. Something I do like to see, I do like to see a good GPA. I want to know that you're not just passionate about games, that you've got a kind of feel for excellence, that you want to do well in everything you do, because that's what you need in games night. There's like no room for people who are going to be second rate. And then the last thing is good core skills. It's cool if you know how to, you can go and get a demo somewhere, and you can copy from a book, you can get like, a shaded 2.0 program running, it's got some cool displacement map or something. What I really want to know is that you can learn, that you've got good core fundamental skills that you've learned, that you can apply to a whole range of problems. And that's something that, I want to make sure that, when you're looking at a degree course, make sure that you are going to get some of that fundamental understanding.
From an artist's perspective, when I look at portfolio samples coming in, I look for some sort of demonstration of that person's usefulness to our studio. Do they get it? Do they understand what it's going to take to create assets going to work in these guys' engines?
Sorry, for a producer, it's really hard to kind of come in with a demo. How do you come in with a demo of how to be a producer? So that's a little unique in our industry. What I'm looking for there when I'm interviewing candidates is good experience of leadership within team exercises at university and the like, and actually learning from mistakes through that process and making sure everyone's staying on track.
I was just wondering, where do you get your storyboarders and sketchbook artists from? And does it matter if a modeler or an animator wanted to do storyboarding and stuff too? Would that help, or would that not matter?
At Midway Games, will abuse and exploit every ounce of talent you have.
to add. Marty doubles as our used car salesman. Art directing. So, yeah, we just to give you an idea about that as storyboard artists, out of 5 game teams at Midway, we have 1 dedicated storyboard artist and concept artist. So we have 1 guy who supports more or less 5 game teams. In terms of doing full-time, 8 to 10 hours a day illustration and storyboarding. But the skills of being able to, communicate visually, to be able to draw something before you start modeling it are hugely valuable. And given 2 people who are interviewing that are both strong 3D modelers, and one of them has traditional art skills, we will always pick the person who has good drawing skills and traditional art skills, always.
We want to see people make the bad decisions on paper, so it's a good habit.
That's one of those tasks that I've made to understand is something that's more likely to get freelanced out than something like a storyboard 2D art. Microsoft Volition, anybody?
No.
At least at Volition, we are. I'd say we're going even into more specialization. We've got full-time concept artists, we got full-time character artists, we got full-time vehicle artists, we got full-time level artists, full-time animators. At least from our perspective, I don't see us outsourcing any of that stuff. I see it staying completely in-house, and I see more and more of it. I mean, our artist staff probably is 3 times our programming staff, and it's likely to increase in the future.
Like I said earlier, this is the greatest collaborative art form ever. We need to have people on staff who can collaborate with the engineers, to work within the constraints of what the engine's going to be able to output on the screen. We need people to come up with good visual designs that will work.
Yeah, one thing too, even on, obviously my area is programming, but even on the art side, one thing that we find a lot is sometimes artists don't necessarily know how to make do with limited resources, because you'll end up with someone who makes a box and it's like 50,000 polygons, where 6 polygons with really good texture maps will give you the exact same results. And so for both programming and art, a lot of what determines who's really good and who's not is how can you do more with less? Because even though the systems keep getting faster and faster, we're always pushing the limits, and when the PS2 and Xbox first came out, there probably were some people who thought, oh, we've got all these resources, and we don't have to worry about being efficient. But as long as I've been in the industry, that's never been the case. That no matter how much power you have, there's always efficiencies that make one game stand out from another.
I think it's a large percentage of our artwork that goes into games. The texture maps are 4 big, 16 colors to make it look beautiful.
That's something that some various companies have looked at. It's something that really differentiates them who are coming in. Is you see a lot of people like really high res recently do technical artwork. It's really interesting, take that and then really cut it down. What does it look like at 600 polygons? What does it look like at 600 polygons with a 128 by 128 texture carefully applied to it? It's 4 bit. And having somebody who can show that progression, if I can take this thing and I can manipulate in time and space, it's, I think, going to put people above everybody else is just coming in. So, hey, if I've got unlimited resources, I can do something great. So if you're artists out there, it's really worth spending some time on.
We just wanted to make sure that we had a chance. Midway was kind enough to put together our presentation, so we want to get that in before we return to questions. Charles or Midway guys?
Midway? Yeah.
Who does the
Thank you.
Could we do the PowerPoint and the TV?
Yes, please. Are you okay, Matt? You need my help?
Marty, you're ready to go? Yeah.
The lights? I can do that.
As the presentation is winding down, to save the exercise, we decided to have people who are going to ask questions line up over here. That way, it's a little more fair, and I'm not racing across the room and missing people. So.
Cool. Well, first of all, thank you again for giving us the opportunity to come here.
Maybe we can do something with people on both sides of the room, but that mic in the corner next to him might work.
Of what we've got going on here at the Midway once Marty gets us set up. Can you line up now?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we're going to line up on both sides of the room. So over by Jason and then over here. So we're not trying to
Okay, so Midway Games, we have about 500 employees. We have 2 studios. Our main studio is here in Chicago, which is where we do internal game development. We also have a studio in San Diego, which is primarily third party. And what third party means is that we publish the game, as was explained earlier, and that's developed by small companies that we hire out.
Hello, everyone. This may be a bit of a silly question, but I've always wondered, I mean, obviously the technology is there, but I've always wondered, is it a specific job description to figure out how to actually implement the technology? So, for example, with Volition, with the Red Faction, in terms of interactive environments, and with Midway in terms of Mortal Kombat and PsyOps, and then Microsoft, of course, with Halo, is it a specific job description, or is it really a team effort between everybody? How does that really work?
Yeah, usually with programming there is specialization. So for example, like there may be someone who specializes in physics, or someone who specializes in AI, or someone who specializes in graphics. So, you know, of course, eventually you do need someone who's kind of like a technical lead, who has a pretty good understanding of everything and knows how to tie everything together. But I think what you'll find is that a lot of the openings do tend to be specialized, like physics or graphics or AI or something like that.
Jason, what I can do is do this. Okay.
Hi. I was just wondering, as far as quality assurance, because that's, if for someone that's looking to get started that way in the industry, what kind of advice do you have for them to get in order to make themselves more noticed?
If you like games, don't do it. Nothing will destroy your love of games more than producers that make you do it endlessly. I think it can be a really good way to get in, and something that one thing that we used to do a lot in 3DO, which was good, was move people from QA into the other functions. And what's always nice when you get somebody that's done that is if you tend to have a really good feel for gameplay, and they bring something else to the team. Something we do interestingly at Microsoft is we have a position called an SDEV, and really that's for somebody who is a programmer, can do really detailed programming tasks. So I'm amazed what some of our SDEVs can do, but they're not quite ready to join a game team as a programmer. Perhaps they're just new in the industry and they can't quite get to that level. And so what they do is they start as an SDEV where you're testing the game, but you're also building a lot of test tools, a lot of automated test harnesses. And then those people often do move into the full game engineering teams. So what I say for getting into that is, I mean, if you've got any kind of real technical background, especially if you've got programming skills, and you can be analytical about a game. It's great to sit down and go, okay, well, this is kind of fun or not, but being able to say, okay, well, I saw this problem, and be able to think about it in a structured way. Well, here's how I would build a whole set of test cases to test this one element of the game. And that's the kind of skills you're looking for, somebody that can create that. But as I said, if you love games, I would go for something other than QA stuff.
Yeah, just as a point of example on that, so the game PsyOps that I showed, the level designers for that, 4 of the level designers working on the game were picked from QA. So QA is a great path into level design and into production. But there are literally, like at Midway in our main QA room, like 150 people testing the game. So you really need to show that you can step up, be a leader, and as Chris is saying, talk about a problem as opposed to, I got here and it broke, but come back and say, I got here, here's how I can get back there again, and I also noticed that these 4 other ways make it break too. That's the kind of thing that'll get you plucked out of QA to do other stuff.
Yeah, I would add that written and oral communication skills are really key. I mean, if you can't be able to write or talk intelligently about a problem or a bug that you've seen, then it's really difficult to get that information out unless you've kind of got those good skills.
So it's not a job that people are afraid to promote the really good QA people out of?
No, absolutely not.
No, in fact, at Midway we use, that's a big promotion path for producers, assistant producers. The guy that is the assistant producer on our current version of Slugfest actually came out of QA as well.
Okay, great. Good. Sure.
Let's take another question on that side. I did do over here.
Okay.
I actually have 4 questions.
One at a time.
What is really doing about the arcade consoles? Even though they're going out obsolete, is there potential for developing more powerful arcade consoles with today's technologies?
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I guess the real question is the market there.
obviously Midway, one of the biggest issues that we faced over the last several years is the transition to the home market, because traditionally we were, a coin-op company doing arcade games and even, pinball with our sister companies. So part of the problem is a technical challenge, and part of it too is even a game design, because when you're trying to design a game that you can get maximum enjoyment out of a 2-minute experience, it's very different than the type of game you would design for a home user. So I think really, for better or worse, I'm actually kind of sad that the arcade market has kind of died, because I used to love going to the arcade, and yeah, they could really do some really cool simulators and some really cool games with today's technology, but unfortunately just there aren't enough people going to arcades to make it financially viable.
You got to wait for your other 3 questions, so you got to let him go and get back at the end of the line and come back. Okay.
In terms of time constraints, do you think it's better to spend years to get a degree or to actually build a portfolio with, say, a bunch of other students? So would you, do you hire like dropouts or who are like from state Japan, or the credentials and pedigree matter more than say a portfolio?
Right, well, okay, so this is my personal philosophy on this. I would encourage you to get the degree, because here's why. Getting a degree teaches you how to think and learn. And I think it was Mark who said down here. The thing about being in games is that you're running into technology for the first time, okay? And even the best universities at some point are training you, okay? And the best thing you can get out of a degree is not necessarily the stuff you learn. The stuff I learned 10 years ago in an electrical engineering degree is obsolete now. The thing that was valuable to me getting a degree was how to think and how to problem solve. So somebody who stuck with a 4-year degree showed that they know how to work within a structure and stick with something. That says a lot about them. So not that there aren't a ton of success stories and a lot of people at Midway working there who are very super productive, super valuable, that don't have degrees, but if you're here and you have the option of finishing a degree, now is the time in your life to do that while you're here, so I would really encourage you to stick with it and do it.
Thanks, Matt.
It's not an either-or thing. Do both, because I don't know if it was Chris or someone said that, if you get 2 candidates and they both have the same GPA and the same degree, but one has a demo and the other one doesn't, chances are the person with the demo is going to get the job.
Yeah. If you're worried about getting kind of practical experience because you're in college, get on internships. Get that experience that way. A lot of gaming companies are doing internships. It gives you hands-on knowledge. You get your face known in the company. There's no better way, and you still get your degree.
Well, if anybody's wondering, like Ed Fries, you may or may not have heard of him, he was head of Microsoft Games. He came as an intern. RGN came as an intern, and Ed owned his own lake. It's not a bad way to do it. The other one I'd say, slightly different, is if you're doing university right, it's actually a lot more fun than building games, so I wouldn't skip that part.
Yeah, it is.
That's the thing, is you don't know now how fun this is until you're done with it. So trust us, you're having more fun now than you will when you get a job.
Real work, stay in school.
Oh, okay.
I'll come down to that. When you hire game designers and game writers, do you hire them straight out of college ever? If so, what types of credentials are you looking for? Is a published novel something that you like? Experience designing computer games themselves or non-computer games? What type of credentials, if any, would you look for?
If it's, the thing is that people can get confused about game design. Normally, the people who actually, if you think about game design as having a concept and seeing it built, the bad news for everyone here is those people have normally been around a long time, and they've really paid their dues coming up right from, either from QA right through level design, scripting, as in like game event scripting to creative scripting, to actually getting a game design. That will take a long time. Coming in, what we've often looked for is, if you're talking about building levels, you want to be in there designing some of the content. It's really, it's nice to have a good range of backgrounds. If you've got creative writing as a skill, that's always a good plus. But also looking at, having an appreciation of art. A lot of our designers are often come from architecture degrees. They have a great impression of space and how to use that space. But also just get out there, get the Unreal Championship editor, get a great editor, do mods, build levels, show that you can put something together that is fun to play more than anything else. Getting a big concept, and that takes that's going to take some years before people would trust you to do that.
So I'll say the first controversial thing tonight, probably not my last. So game designers, I think, are born and not bred. I think that to be a truly good game designer, it's not something you can learn. I mean, I think it's something that's, like a good musician or a good programmer or a good somebody else. I mean, I think you've just got this natural ability to design a game. And I think as Chris said, it's a very, very difficult thing to do. And we just recently hired somebody from the outside who's been in the industry for 10 years because we didn't have anybody internally qualified to do design for a particular game that we're trying to do. It's just very hard to find them.
Yeah, the other thing too, when it comes to game design is keep in mind the platform that you're on, sometimes you get these designs that there's just no way they could ever be done. Like it is a very unique skill. I wish I had it. I don't. But to be able to come up with a design that is compelling to the player and yet is doable and can be done within a reasonable budget with reasonable manpower as well.
Actually, Joe, I think you hit on a really interesting point now, which is it's relatively easy to come up with something that sounds compelling. That's like big, it's everything, it's the rules. Hey, I'm going to do a game, and you're going to be able to go anywhere and do anything. I think if you really want to show off skill, it's how can you make something that's compelling with hardly anything. When you've got like one character and they've got like one thing to interact with, but it's a compelling experience, that really shows skill and talent, and that's something that's really interesting to see.
Yeah, I've been impressed with people that have shown up with board games that they've designed, strategy games, like D&D. I mean, game design is an entire field, and it's not just video game design. A lot of times when we get young people who show up and they want to do game design, that translates to they want to name the character, or this guy should wear a red vest. And that stuff is easy to do. The thing we need are people that are thinking about games, like you said about architecture. Architecture is not just throwing up bricks and putting lights in a building. It's about how does that thing sit in a city? How does it interact? What do people think and feel about it? That's the level of game design we need to be thinking at to really break into that.
The question sort of is, can you tell a story? And can you tell a story on the screen? And you won't know until you try, really. And if you tell the story other ways, they may say, terrific, that looks like it has potential, or stick with books,
Okay, thank you, Jason.
I've always been kind of curious what some people in the industry's opinions and just their opinions of some of the more radical consoles that are going to be coming out, like the Phantom and some of the more PCs but are still consoles, I've just always been curious, what your opinions are of them.
We're going to have to see who believes in the Phantom poll.
Basically.
Nobody at the table believes that the Phantom is real? Nobody at the table believes that the Phantom is real. So, there's number one. But there are things like the Apex pseudo console. Microsoft, Xbox people might wish to exempt themselves from answering that one. But these sort of pseudo consoles, these home media entertainments, maybe the question is, are those game playing environments?
I think a real console has 60 million units in the marketplace, and Xbox doesn't have 60 million units in the marketplace, and things that have much less than that, I find it hard to believe are real. For me, console means a lot of things. It means a certain style of game, not just a piece of hardware. Mm-hmm. It's a certain experience, and it's very different than PC. And taking something that looks like a PC and cutting all the corners off and putting it in a box. Well, you could call it a console, and I guess kind of we did. But what turns it into a console is what you do around that. It's the type of entertainment you give and the kind of commitment you have to game players, and that's what really makes a console. So you can come out with all sort of hardware specs, but it really takes commitment to a certain type of gameplay and giving people a really cool experience in their living rooms that they can just pick up and play, and that's kind of what really makes, I think, a platform.
Oh. Okay. Number two. Sorry.
Okay, I was just wondering also about the idea of 2D gaming. Do you think that that's also starting to fade out, or will there still be some 2D platform games that will still be available?
Well, I mean, I think that 2D versus 3D, I mean, when 3D first showed up, there was a big distinction between the two, but I don't know that it really matters. I mean, you could look at a game like Parappa the Rappa, you could look at all kinds of games that are cel-shaded and say, oh, you know, these have 2D elements. I mean, you guys got a little preview there of Mortal Kombat coming up this fall. It has basically what's Tetris Puzzle Fighter in there. You know, it's a 2D, it's a fun game mechanic. So I think that it's just it's a certain mechanic that people like, and if there's a cool game, it really doesn't matter if it's 2D or 3D, you know, so to speak.